Thank you all for joining us today. I'm Debbie Pryor, the Artistic Program Manager at Guildhouse, and I welcome you all to the summer edition of the reVision Speaker Series. It's very distracting seeing all of your faces. I don't know who to look at. It's nice though, it's very nice. This series of conversations is aimed at increasing connectivity within the arts during this time of disconnect, to offer an opportunity for artists to increase their well-being and to find new models of sustainability for their practice. Resilience, adaptability and well-being through the lens of arts practice is at the heart of the summer sessions. Speakers and participants will discuss their practice and community, acknowledging the hardships this year in particular has thrown our way, but also new ways in which we can come together and build our resilience. Guildhouse has received support from the Australia Council Adapt Fund for the reVision program, in addition to support from the Day Family Foundation and Creative Partnerships Australia, for which we are very grateful. I'm speaking to you from Kaurna land in South Australia, and I pay my respects to the traditional elders of this land, past, present and emerging, and I acknowledge the rich and ongoing creative culture of the Aboriginal people. Today I'll be talking to Erin Coates and Curator Leigh Robb, and before we begin I'll quickly go through some housekeeping. You can ask some questions at any time in the chat box down the bottom of the screen. We'll address them during the Q&A towards the end, or you can type in the chat box, "I'd like to ask a question," and we'll turn your mic on during those questions. Aside from that, please keep your mic turned off, as incidental or background noise easily filters through. Please feel free to use the chat box to say hi, post a link about your practice and tell us the land you are joining us from. Today we're discussing endurance and female camaraderie in creative practice with Erin Coates and Leigh Robb. Erin Coates is a Perth-based visual artist and creative producer working across drawing, sculpture and film, with a practice informed by her deep interest in the natural world, biology and science fiction. Her work at times engages with a transgressive bodily aesthetic to probe our understandings of fear, horror, strength and survival, and to disrupt conventional gendered roles and assumptions. Leigh Robb is the Curator of Contemporary Art at Art Gallery of South Australia, with 20 years of experience in the arts. Robb's previous roles include Curator at Picker in Perth, Associate Director at Thomas Stein Gallery in London, and Head of Internship Program at the Peggy Guggenheim Collection in Venice. Her most recent curatorial project was the Incredible Monster Theatres for the 2020 Adelaide Biennial of Australian Art. Let's welcome Erin and Leigh as they discuss strength and endurance in female camaraderie in creative practice. Thanks, Leigh.
Thank you, Debbie. Thank you so much for having us, and hello to Erin in Perth. So we really appreciate you inviting us into this very, meaty and incredibly relevant topic, not just in this year, but in contemporary art and art history. And so when Debbie and Emma Faye reached out for this summer session and said, which artist would you like to be in conversation with around ideas of female strength, resilience, and endurance, the first person that came to mind was the remarkable Erin Coates. I was very lucky to work with Erin over many years when I moved to Perth, and she was one of the first artists that I met. And I remember clearly seeing a work that she made called Merge, where she had sacrificed her little white Ford Laser for a new video work and exploded the windows. I'd also been invited to some of these. We're shooting through some images there of almost sort of guerrilla film festivals where Erin would curate other artists into films and held in car parks. And in addition to that, this work that we're looking at here on the screen, which is called Thirst, was a zombie film that Erin made. So ideas around, I guess, challenging the sort of looking at body horror, but also challenging female roles and also female protagonists in film is something that has sort of endured in her practice. But I think thinking about endurance as almost as an artistic strategy is something that, Erin, I've been fascinated to witness in your projects over the years. And I guess a work in particular that I guess is an interesting place to start. Is the last climber alive must keep herself fit and ready, and it's quite a pertinent work because it tracks a lone female athlete or climber in an empty apocalyptic city, scaling the heights of buildings, and keeping herself agile and limber. And so, Erin, I just wanted to open up and thank you for the conversation ahead, and to just ask about that relationship between female physicality, strength, and endurance in your creative practice.
Sure. Thanks so much for that amazing introduction. I'll just quickly bring up an image of the Last Climber video that you were referring to there. So, yeah, it's amazing looking back on these images and sort of remembering the first time that Leigh and I encountered each other in Perth. And it was back in sort of around 2009 or 10, I think. Yeah, around 2010. And at the time, I was making projects with other friends in like car parks and sort of one night venues, and just sort of finding ways to have these one night events. And at the time it was about finding our own way of making and presenting art. And we were really interested in doing it sort of outside of gallery spaces, because we were interested in embracing the kind of grunginess of those spaces, and looking at things like car culture, looking at cult cinema and drive-in cinemas. And so it worked so well as a space, and it kind of intersected with my interest at the time around screen culture and how women are represented in that, and breaking it apart and finding these other ways to kind of insert the body into video spaces, but also give these different experiences of how we experience the screen. So making kind of a full screening experience in a kiosk in a car yard, or screening on side of buildings. And so it was pretty rad and grungy, and involved, blowing windows out of cars and scouting through scrapyards to find material. So a lot of it was also based at the time on not having very big budgets, but also just this desire for myself and other artists that I was working with to have control over how we were representing our own practices, and having control over the context in which they were experienced. So it was not waiting to be shown, it was finding and creating those contexts ourselves for how we wanted to be shown. And there was often kind of a mammoth effort, when you're getting a car and you're blowing the windows out of it and you want to shoot it with a ballistics camera in slow motion, like you need certain things. So like I needed an aircraft hangar to shoot the car into. I needed like a beautiful polished concrete floor. So it was just around kind of tapping into my networks and who do I know that kind of might have access to these things. So that was for me the beginnings of building up those informal networks with my friends and my peers, and not being a one-way exchange, asking them sort of if they wanted to participate, and if so, what were the terms of that participation. And so I found really quickly that a lot of my friends, even if they weren't in the arts, really wanted to get on board, because for them, it gave them this access to the art world and these interesting experiences actually being involved in making artworks, and that they hadn't been asked before. And they had all these other skills, they might be pilots or engineers or mechanics. And so it was like having access to this other audience as well. So these collaborators became peers and audience too. So and then it kind of shifted into my interest in climbing and tapping into that friendship group as well, which is like perhaps the next thing that we might talk about.
Yeah, so with the work, The Last Climber Alive Must Keep Herself Fit and Ready, the protagonist in that is one of you. When we were just thinking about this discussion, we were also going back through some of your incredible projects, Erin, and also the title of this this talk and discussion is around female camaraderie, and how certain sort of fearless duos at different times have allowed you to take your work literally to another level when you've been scaling artworks style, or literally working out routes to inform, 7-meter high sculptures, or, building a climbing gym. And Siobhan Cooley is the central figure that you sort of shot against a green screen, but then you were traveling to Beijing, and you actually, the footage that you can see is this incredible model of the city of Beijing, but completely empty. And then you've situated Siobhan in that. But maybe it'd be great to unpack some of the thinking around that work, but also, I guess, the beginnings of a longer term collaborative relationship with, say, Siobhan Cooley, and then we'll move into the pact, which I guess visually captures a lot of those ideas and enduring sort of friendships.
Sure, yeah. So the last climber alive must keep herself fit and ready was a work that was kind of made like really over 2 periods. So I lived in Beijing for 6 months, and at the time, it was an amazing experience, and I got to do a lot of things there that you need to live there to sort of understand the city and start to find these other trails through it. So while I was there, I discovered that there's one of the largest architectural models in the world is in Beijing in the Urban Planning Hall. And it's not really very well visited, which surprised me because it's the most astonishing model. It's one of the biggest in the world. And so I went there over a period of time and filmed it. And I didn't ask permission, which is, not my style. I just kind of went in and surreptitiously filmed this model. And a lot of the time I'd be the only one that was in there. And the whole model had this incredible lighting system inside it. So with sort of louvers in the ceiling of the building and little lights that would come on and off. And it was showing this perfection of a city as it's meant to be sort of presented without all of the messiness of humans actually living in it. So there's something sort of deeply utopic about architectural models, but also dystopic, because when you really start looking closely at architectural models, you can see sort of human hairs and buildings are sort of falling over slightly, and there's all of these sort of ratty things. It's very hard to maintain a model of that size. So there's also something deeply dystopic about this model, but it was just such a beautiful thing. So I knew that I wanted to insert something into it. I filmed the footage, and it wasn't until I came back to Australia that I knew what needed to happen. So at the time, I'd been doing a lot of rock climbing. It's something I got into previously when I'd been living in Canada. And my climbing buddy, Siobhan Cooley, who you can see here, the two of us have done a lot of climbing together and have this real trust with one another. And so I asked her, I was like, it'd be so great actually to have you inhabiting this empty city. And, a lot of the time when you have this, last man alive scenarios like The Quiet Earth or I Am Legend, or, like there's numerous other examples, it's often a male protagonist that is left. And occasionally there'll be an Eve that's there for him, but, it's really often a male hero. So I wanted to recast this sort of lone survivor as a woman and make her a climber. And she's sort of accruing fitness and she's testing her strength against the city. So I got Siobhan to climb against a green screen that we set up in a climbing gym, like with no ropes. So she was just like free climbing to the roof of the climbing gym. Once again, we didn't ask, we just sort of did it. We went in after hours because we knew the owners and, pasted this green screen on the side of the climbing wall and shot it. And then got her doing all of this other training that we were doing climbing, and then inserted this footage in there. So this was kind of one of the first films that I made that was engaging with climbing and female strength, and was about this sort of lone hero, this woman that isn't really being, she's not there for a male protagonist. She's there on her own terms, and you don't know exactly what that narrative is. You sense that there's a threat that she needs to prepare herself for. So it was a really kind of great introduction into sort of working with climbers. I kind of realized, wow, this is sort of untapped. And at the time, I was doing a lot of climbing training and, like climbing in competitions and going on climbing trips overseas. And so most of my friends were climbers, and I just realized there was actually so many interesting things about what climbers do, how we read space, how we map it, and how we share those maps with each other, that sharing that kind of information. And that camaraderie that comes actually because you are literally relying on each other for life or death. You have to have this sense of trust and this sort of implicit communication a lot of the time, and really knowing each other. And things about each other. You've seen each other kind of being really scared or triumphant. You've seen each other's blood kind of scraped on a rock surface. So there's sort of this bond often that climbers have that I thought was a really interesting space to explore. And often with my friends, when we were in the city, we would talk about architecture and public art and start assessing it in terms of how climbable we thought it was. So that's really where this next series came from. And I might actually share the screen with you. Just give me one sec. Oh, it's okay. Leigh's sharing it. Go ahead, Leigh. Yeah, so this next series, this was done before a big show called Kinesphere. This was kind of an earlier body of work, and it was sort of a bit fast and grungy to start with. And again, it was about going out with my friends who are climbers early morning and filming these sort of adventures, climbing public art around our city. And it became about this wanting to share these videos with other climbers. So that's sort of how it started in a way. It was this sort of us assessing public art and appreciating it in a different way and finding this other formal language to discuss it. And we'd often talk about it in this lexicon of climbing, of the, you know, of the edges and the holds and the moves that you had to do to successfully climb these public artworks. And from that, it kind of grew into this bigger project that Leigh sort of invited me to participate in. So I might get her to speak a little bit about that, but alongside kind of these actions, these kind of sketch videos of us climbing these artworks, I started doing a whole series of drawings where I was applying the, like the beta, the climbing route information that you use when you're sharing climbing routes with each other, applying that to public artworks and then sharing these images with other people and also as artwork. So that was sort of this, you know, this meta language in climbing being applied onto artworks and then sharing it in a gallery space. And it was amazing because climbers that would come in would be able to read it in a really different way to other people. So it was this remapping of urban space. And a part of it is around, you know, decoding the space and looking at, you know, how public space is demarcated, what is public and private, and how we're meant to move through it, and actually sort of finding an expanded way of moving through urban space. So it was also, it had other aims to it as well, which I might get Leigh to speak to for a little bit.
Yeah, and thanks, Erin. I'm just scrolling through some of our, you know, some of the images from the major solo show that I guess goes back to our long history of working together. So that was in 2014, and there was an incredible commission, a very unusual model, which only happened on, you know, sort of one occasion, but it was called the Catherine Hannay Commission, and it was an opportunity for an institution to work with, to put in a proposal together with an artist to do a major installation and a publication, and for the artist to get significant fees, as well as support for the production, and then the gallery would also support and run the costs of working on a long-term, major, significant, ambitious project. So to be able to, you know, sort of pursue the big ideas. And so it was something that Erin and I put in together with Pika and with obviously the support of Amy Barrett-Leonard, the amazing director at the time, still director at Pika. And it was sort of incredible because I think Brooke Andrew is one of the other recipients nationally, and so it was really phenomenal to be able to realize and work for a good couple of years on this project, and so to, you know, physically and in terms of the production, I got to see firsthand. I was like, I asked Erin, you know, I was like, what's the work that you've always wanted to make? And she had this extraordinary vision of creating a 7-meter high tower within the center of the gallery that housed a micro cinema. You can see people sort of going in and out, and it sort of tracks a route which actually mimics a route that you could do if you were to climb the clock tower of the Pika building on the front, which I'm sure you really wanted to try and do, but yeah, I think I don't know if that ended up happening in the end, but who knows? You probably did one of those guerrilla nighttime climbs on the gallery, but and that gives you a sense of the scale of it. But it was, you know, thinking about endurance and, you know, female camaraderie. Erin and I were sort of reflecting on this, you know, because I was, what I found really interesting at different points watching Erin's practice is the relationship between, I guess, thinking about the long game as an artist, and also the sort of physical and mental, I guess, sort of resilience in order to set about making these projects and to keep making bigger and larger projects, which have involved you learning to, you know, make films and be super technically adept on one hand, but also physically making the resin casts and, you know, wanting to make a fully graded climbing gym that the public could use. So for the duration of this amazing exhibition, all the climbers would come in and work out all the routes, and you also had to scale up that side wall, and you could actually look in, and then you would be rewarded by seeing another video of a climb. And you used like three-dimensional, you know, 3D footage and cameras and drones, and you know you were studying parkour and climbing, and you know, Erin would invite me out on these, like, you know, 5 a.m. drone shoots, or to come and watch them scale, you know, public artworks. And so it was, you know, it was very exciting. And so when you're thinking about, I don't think, you know, pursuing these really complex works or ideas are about the absence of fear. I think it's about the harnessing of fear, or in a way, the mastery of fear, which is something that, you know, I'm always just so incredibly impressed with Erin about. And we also talked a lot at that point and around, you know, I was asking you, like, what are the touchstones, whether that's in film or literature, that have allowed you to think about what it means to make art for the long term and to make these really complex works? And Erin, maybe you want to talk about the impact of Haruki Murakami's What I Talk About When I Talk About Running, and his relationship to the sort of discipline of running and training for marathons, and the creative sort of corollary of being a writer, and how those two things are completely entwined and allowed him to go somewhere else. And then we'll segue back to, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You know, we really did everything with this project, didn't we, Leigh? I couldn't have done it without, and I just want to state this before I go back to Haruki, I couldn't have done this without Leigh and without Pika and without that kind of support structure around me. I mean, this was big, ambitious work. You know, it was a massive commitment, and it was a lot of moving parts to create that tower, to do these. We were climbing public artworks at 5 a.m. kind of twice a week for months, and it was sort of this regime that myself and my friends had, and we'd sort of stake out places. We'd figure out who'd be the best person to boulder them. This is all done without ropes, and this was for the film that was shown inside the micro cinema. We were filming it with drones, and everything was kind of happening. And to put that much into a project, and any project I feel that I'm working on, that I usually I'm all in with my projects, and I'm balancing this also with work and family. So to be able to sustain the energy that you need to do these kinds of projects, but to keep doing them over the course of your creative life, I started thinking about what is it that you need? How do you sustain yourself? You know, how do you have that endurance? And it was really great timing, but I was reading a book by Haruki Murakami that Leigh mentioned. And previously I'd just read his fiction, but this was the first non-fiction of his. And in it, he speaks about marathon running as a metronome, as this kind of beat, this thing that runs alongside his writing, that kind of gives him energy and keeps him grounded and provides all these other things. And it's not like this for every creative, but for me, I realized that climbing was really important to sustaining my creative practice, that there's a physicality to how I make work, and there's an endurance that I need, but there's also that psychological endurance, and climbing kind of gave me that space and that energy and that calmness that I needed. And in climbing, you're dealing with fear and risk all the time. Like that's what you're assessing. You're not taking stupid risks. You're understanding the limits of your body and your skills. You're understanding your climbing partner, and you're like making those assessments constantly so that you don't hurt yourself. And in a way, in art, we're doing the same. We're making those assessments around what's our capacity. Is this project, is it the right time for me to do this now? Do I have the right network around me? Do I have the right skills? And then being able to do that, you know, of course there's fear and there's risk in there because there has to be something at stake, but you're understanding that you can, how far you can push yourself. So there was this, for me, this understanding of that relationship between climbing and what it was giving me, and how that related to my creative practice, and how I feel it kind of climbing and now freediving as well, like how these things feed my creative practice and allow me to keep wanting to make really ambitious work that I have to throw myself into in a way that's, you know, just complete. How can I keep doing that? I can keep doing it. And for me, like, that's my answer. And I know it's different for different artists, but that's, yeah. And, you know, I looked at a few other artists that seem to have these relationships in their practice, and I find it really interesting when they speak about what their relationship is with endurance and physicality over the long term. And this is not just a fast turnaround thing. It's like year after year, if you want to be an artist, what is it that's sustaining you? What is your relationship with your art making and those other aspects of your life?
Yeah, Erin, I mean, I think that's a, you know, beautiful summary of that as well. And part of what you've talked about is also building that community long term. I mean, it's also, you know, wonderful to be reflecting back on this you know, major solo show of yours at that we did, you know, nearly 7 years ago. And that, you know, 7 years later, we're able to work together again in the context of a biennial, which is also the, you know, the long-term, you know, tracking and following of an artist's career. But, you know, we were also looking at, you know, key, you know, female partners and partnerships in terms of, you know, curating and also the production of things. And I'm just looking at this, you know, when we had to build that giant scaffold in the middle of Pika, and that's, you know, Nadia Johnson, who now works at ACME in Melbourne as a production manager. But, you know, there was, you know, Nadia and I and Erin and Siobhan and, you know, a huge other, you know, team as well. But, you know, we were remembering being up there at 2 a.m. the night before we opened, like, painting the outside of the work at, like, you know, 7 meters high. And yeah, there was a lot of interesting sort of buffering that has to happen between the curator and the artist, in terms of a lot of people are very nervous about these types of projects and works because they're so ambitious, and they're, you know, they're complex. They require a lot of production. They require a lot of people, and you've got to keep a lot of people safe as well along the way. Part of that, I think, is also keeping the artist safe to be able to take those risks and to support in that project. But, you know, there were certainly things where you're just like, you know, you'd had to work with you know, engineers and architects to make this scaled up, incredible structure. And, you know, at each turn there was so much new information that needed to be learnt, and collectively and bodily, for everyone to pull off this exhibition. You know.
Yeah, you know, and that's a great point around kind of production management and having Nadia involved in this. I mean, she's just indefatigable. Like, she just kept going, and each problem she would find a solution. And sometimes you need somebody that's not the artist or the curator to take on board that stuff, because it's so huge, and you have to stay focused on the things you need to get done and not get swallowed up by every part of it. So it was this dream team for me. It was like the best combination of making was having you and Nadia on the team, and I felt like we could do anything together. So yeah, it was really intense, every stage of this, making the work and installing the work. And it felt like it was only possible because of the combination that we had. Like, that was how, you know, like we had to wear like full body safety harnesses just to install the work. It was, you know, it was intense, and respirators to use the glue to join all the blocks together. And so it's all these different kinds of risks that you have to mitigate along the way. But yeah, I mean, I think also we were driven by the excitement of it. It was this feeling of like, you know, there'd never been a work this big inhabiting the center of that space. And it's like, it's about time that like a kind of a women's team comes and occupies this space. It's because God knows there's enough like male modernist plot sculptures in our city that kind of occupy space. It's like it was this other rewriting, and it was actually all about the internal space here. It was about that micro cinema and inviting the audience to come inside and kind of view the work and see their city in a way that they've never seen before. So there was lots of different kinds of relationships going on to inside and outside and to our bodies and how our bodies move through space and that ownership that we have over our urban spaces. So for a lot of the climbers that were involved in this project with me, I mean, they felt an incredible sense of ownership over it, which was amazing. And they were all there at the opening, and they came in and were training on the bouldering wall, you know, throughout the course of the exhibition. And, you know, we've discussed it since then, and like that project has changed our relationship with urban space. Like when we're walking around the city and we see these things that we've climbed, we have this different understanding of those spaces now. And we have this sort of bond knowing that like together we scaled those artworks. So it was, I mean, there's something very cheeky, irreverent about it, but it was, the sense behind it was like wanting to have another relationship with urban space and wanting to appreciate these artworks in a different way, and you know, and also using our own physical skills to do that. So there was a great bond between us in doing that, and it was very much this team pulling it together. I mean, there was also an amazing sound artist that worked on this, and he went out and percussed the sculptures that we'd been climbing to record sounds to make the soundtrack for the film. So all of these little details, there were all of these collaborators that fed into this project, which is how I love working, is finding these people that have the skills that I don't and bringing them on board and allowing them to have ownership inside of projects. Like that community that you build around your practice, like for me, that is just as important as the artwork. Like it is the artwork, it's part of it. And it's what also sustains me as an artist. And, you know, and will going forward. Yeah, I mean, maybe we should talk a bit about the pact and then got on to the other collaborations that I've been working on to do with Under the Ocean.
I was just about to share that we're already at 33 minutes past. So, you know, and one of the, I've probably spoken about this work in a lot of different contexts as well, and on, you know, feminist panels and other things, and it's this incredibly elegant, but, you know, a work that really, you know, captures that, you know, that camaraderie, that female strength, but also, you know, brings together a whole lot of cinematic elements, and it's called The Pact, and I hope you can all see it on the screen now. And I'll let, you know, I'll hand to Erin to talk more about it, but even to make this, it was so much around the specific physicality or kinesphere, the sort of space in which your body occupies, that you constructed a set that was specific to the conjoined bodies of yourself and Siobhan in the making of this work. And it was so much about, you know, pressure being, you know, sort of formalized, but another way of representing that, you know, in terms of keeping yourself elevated just above the ground in this, and that you were entirely dependent on each other, but you're also, you know, push that incredible sort of push-pull and tension, both in that sort of relationship of support, is, you know, just so beautifully played out in this, you know, really sort of muscular work.
Yeah, so for the pact, like I really wanted to distill down and make this about, you know, my relationship with my climbing partner and that sort of reliance that we have and that understanding that we have of fear and strength and horror. And there's an abstract horror that comes out in this film. You get this sense that we have to rely on each other, or there really is something terrible will happen. There's this kind of sense of foreboding that comes from the score that was made for this. And also there's elements of blood in this film that kind of start appearing. And so I constructed a set that was based on our own body dimensions for us being able to do these compression moves where we're pushing against each other, against the sides of the set, and able to suspend ourselves in the set. So it was made, you know, specifically for us. And in it, it's basically a black cube that we were filming, you know, like from above and from one side, and suspending ourselves, like we're about 1.5 meters off the ground for the most part, and had to use massive endurance to kind of hold ourselves pressed against each other and move in this choreography around it. So it was around this, it's a mirroring that's kind of going on, this sort of connection and reliance on one another, but also the fact that we have different strengths, like our body shapes are quite different. So there was different ways that we needed to move to be able to support each other in that space. So it was essentially about that relationship and that sort of intensity of understanding that sometimes our lives rely on one another, and also my interest in horror and in women that work in horror. So it's drawing from these sort of tropes from horror cinema, the way that it's been lit, and having this very pared down colouring in it as well, that it's just the black, the red and the white. So for the costuming, you know, I was looking at like Kill Bill and Tank Girl and Rollerball and roller derby costumes, and sort of every element that was included, because it was so minimal, was very considered. It was about making this sort of quite distilled and intense visual language in there. So yeah, it was also, you know, in a way it was a bit of a it was a homage to my friend who's been involved in making, she's not an artist, but she's been involved in making so many of these artworks with me, and it was around just exploring that relationship in quite an intense way. And at the time, you know, like I said, I was really looking at a lot of different women horror directors and looking at women behind the camera, not just in front of it. And the fact that a lot of women directors have been written out of cinematic history, especially genre history. So that for me was sort of wanting to make us sort of behind the camera and in front of it. So Siobhan helped to choreograph that film with me as well. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it was really hard to make. It was like 2 days of shooting, and to build the set, like I had to line it with this black fabric that was very, very matte and would absorb the light so that you couldn't see it. And it wasn't exactly the best material for climbing on, like you'd slip off it. So there were just so many moments when we would just we'd be holding this pose to absolute breaking point and then just like collapse on the ground. So it was funny, and there was a lot of humor in it, but we ended up with sort of bruises on us, and it was like the muscle fatigue from 2 days of filming inside this space. But at no point would Siobhan have gone, I've had enough, I'm not doing this. It was like neither of us would have done that, because we've been to each other's limits, and we know, and they were much beyond this. So that was also that interesting thing of like knowing that I could make this work with her, and that she was going to say yes the whole way. Yeah.
I think that's I think that's probably a great time to maybe segue to some questions. Would that be right, Debbie? Are we at that point? And I'll also bring up some images of dark water, because we were just about that many people in the audience, and you know, thanks everyone for joining us. Hopefully got a chance to see, as part of Monster Theatre's the Adelaide Biennial of Australian Art this year, and also speaks to an incredible enduring collaboration between Erin Coates and Anna Nazari. So I'll bring up some of those images whilst maybe we take some questions from the audience.
Sure. I might just briefly introduce dark water as well. So another person that I've collaborated with extensively is artist Anna Nazari, and she is a visual artist. And I really sought her out because of her incredible skills in pyrography, in etching, in sculpting, in sort of anything she turns her hand to, she can kind of master quite quickly. So I was still making work about climbing, but I was also quite interested in oceanic spaces and in the sort of submerged bodies and in maritime histories in the town that I'd grown up in. And so I invited Anna to come and learn about the history of whaling in the town that I grew up in, and to look at scrimshaw and to reinvigorate this sort of old art form. And also she's an artist that has a real interest in kind of horror and the abject body, and you know, she doesn't shy away from kind of really looking at things. So from this collaboration, we've made 3 films that have all been partially filmed underwater, and the last one that we made, so this Xenophobia was the first one that we did, which was filmed 20 meters underwater on the wreck of a sunken whale chaser in Albany called the Chains 2. And you know, you think filming stuff around climbing public art is hard. We'll try filming stuff underwater on a whaling ship. It's this whole other level of difficulties that I felt I'd entered. But once again, it was around this community that I had. My dad was a professional scuba diver, and I'd sort of grown up around that world. So I had access to boats and a whole diving community. So the final film that we made, Dark Water, was in Leigh's amazing Monster Theatres, and this is about a woman who finds an ocean in the walls of her home. And it's very much, it's a film that is about women's stories and matrilineal trauma and reproduction, but it's also about oceans, and it kind of has this metaphors of watery bodies, but the set is filled with endemic species of flora and fauna that are from the waters that Anna and I snorkel in around Perth. So it brought in this interest in science and biology. But to shoot this film, we had to build a set. I had to build a tunnel in my backyard and flood it. I had to build a set and sink it in a swimming pool. Like, it was just this whole next level of difficult, which by this stage I was like, well, surely I can do this if I can climb public art and build a 7-meter tower. But this was really, really hard. And it was really like 2 years of like getting the funds and the team together and making everything and building it. So this is Anna and I on the set.
An award-winning film, Erin. It's won like multiple awards now.
It has. I'm very proud of it. Yeah, it's done really well in the festival circuit. It's been a great shame that I haven't been able to go to any of the festivals this year, and a lot of them have ended up being online. So that's sad. But it's filming in Perth finally in Revelation Film Festival next week. So it'll be the first time I've seen this film in the cinema, which I'm really, really excited about. Here's some of our crew inside the set that we shot. Oh, that's me. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. So, I mean, all of the prosthetics and the practical effects in there, Anna and I made everything. Like, we made everything kind of from scratch. And there was this sort of kinetic practical effects set that we had divers behind the walls, like operating the robotics of everything. So it was just a joy to learn all these new skills and to kind of explore working with my diving friends and getting into that world. It was sort of going from climbing up to going down, and it's this whole other adventure in art making, and it's been amazing.
But it also sort of charts your, I guess, movement into working around being a producer as well as a filmmaker, and both of you being filmmakers, writing the script, making the set. I mean, there's no project that I can think of that better captures the idea of this sort of superwoman to that end. It was an extraordinary achievement and an undertaking, and again, you were learning how to do free diving and taking on a whole nother sort of physical element to be able to do this, but also making it in collaboration with Anna. So I think probably on that note, I know that we've spoken over time, Debbie, so call us in line and let us know what's next. I'm sure we didn't get a chance to do a public talk with Erin IRL when we opened the biennial, and everything was closed pretty quickly, and the plans were to bring Erin back, and Erin also worked on the studio, curating the studio there as well, for the biennial. So it's probably a great chance to ask some questions as well.
Yeah, thank you. That was so inspiring and informative, and it's such a great window into such a huge practice that you have, Erin, but also the beautiful relationship that the two of you have as artist and curator. And I'm wondering, Erin, being that you already work within endurance, and I guess your work is a metaphor for mental and emotional survival, I'm wondering what your personal tools have been this year, because it has been such a year of upheaval, and as you know, you've won some awards, and you haven't been able to see your work in the same way that you would have previously, and I'm just wondering how that's kind of had an effect on you personally and on your practice. And how
Yeah, look, I mean, it's been really hard for everyone. I feel, I'm lucky, at least I still have a job, so I haven't had to deal with that. There's been elements of like real conflict and difficulty in my job, but I feel really lucky in Perth that I've still been able to go out and free dive. So it's been about finding those things that sustain me, going climbing and diving and seeing my friends when I can. And yeah, like we all need to just take care sometimes. So a lot of this year has been just going back to those things. And I mean, I've had another big studio project this year that's engaging with the river in our city, with the Darawal Yarragon. And so I've been working in the studio on that, and it's been a really nice thing to focus on. But it's been deeply disappointing as well to not be able to, you know, like so much work went into Dark Water, and I had like Anna and I had such big plans to go to these festivals and engage with other women directors and horror directors and, you know, people working in all kinds of amazing underwater cinema stuff, and we haven't been able to do any of that. So that obviously really disappointing. And I guess it's like this, you just have to find those things that sustain you and keep pushing through and working in your studio. It's like, yeah. I don't know if I have any one strategy. Like, it's not like we've had any choice in this, so it's just trying to find the things that you can do that keep you going.
Definitely. Thank you so much. We're going to jump to some of the questions that have come through from participants. From Catherine Truman: fantastic and inspiring. Thank you both. Erin, I'm wondering if your sense of risk has changed over time.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really hard one. I guess my, you know, like I'm not doing as much high level like climbing training as I used to. So I probably wouldn't go out and climb a public artwork off the bat straight away. I'd have to build up to that. But my sense of risk hasn't changed in that sense. It's still around knowing my abilities and my limits. And I've been doing a lot of freediving training so that I can shoot this film in the river this year. And that's been all about another thing. It's been about learning how to hold my breath for a really long time and stay really calm and have control over that part of my body. So I guess I've just transferred from one thing to another. It's the same strategies that I'm using. As far as risk, like I have started to take out insurance on shoots now because I've become aware of other people, and if something goes wrong and I'm not covered for insurance, I don't want people that I'm working with to be, you know, I don't want a situation where we can't cover something if it goes wrong. So yeah, I guess I've become a little more practical as I've started to work with professional filmmakers and tap more into that world, realizing that it's not just this little individual guerrilla project that I'm going out and shooting, that there's other people involved and I have to take care of them. So yeah, it's responsibility, I guess, is where that sense of risk has changed.
Thank you. From Jane Skier, we have: you are amazing. Love, love, love your work. Once you build all of these props, do you keep them in storage or do you get rid of them? Especially the gym work. I find storage a massive strain on my making. Just a cool question.
Yeah, no, I love these practical questions because that's so true. Like, this is like one of the things that really affects artists. I don't have a big studio. I work in my house. I'm just lucky my husband lets me take over every surface of every part of our house, and he just he doesn't complain ever. So I'm really lucky in that sense. But yeah, you know, I have to recycle props and give things away, and I just had a big studio sale and cleaned a lot of stuff out, and like I try not to put too much into storage. I find maybe I'll regret it one day if I want to come back and find those things, but I just can't. Like, it stresses me out having piles of boxes everywhere. So I tend to kind of move from one project to the next, and I find a way to just sell or give away or repurpose things. You know, like that's what I have to do. Like with film sets and props, like you just can't keep that stuff. It would take over my life too much.
I think a lot of artists are hoarders, really, because we see the use in so many things and the ability to reuse things. So it must be hard to let some things go, I can imagine.
It is really hard, and we all know like the investment of time that we've spent making something, but your value that you place on it is not the same as other people's value all the time. So it's like you have to think about, actually, you're going to use this thing again. What value does it have beyond the thing that you've just done with it? And yeah, like I'm pretty harsh on my assessment of the things around me because I need that space for new projects. And I do all of my own, you know, model making and resin casting and silicone casting, all that kind of stuff at home, and building, you know, props and sets. So I have to have that space for tools and for working in. So you can't keep things around if it's compromising your ability to make new stuff.
I have another question from Zoe Freening, who says, this has been fascinating. How do you deal with the paradox of these activities feeding your practice, yet taking time away from your practice and having to fit with artists' already multiple shifts?
That's a complicated question. I don't think it's a paradox. To me, it's all connected and they feed into each other. So, you know, I work also as a producer and a curator. That probably is where I have to do the most balancing. I have to have really clear boundaries between when I'm working as a curator or a producer, when I'm working as an artist, so that my life is still, you know, controllable and that I don't end up burning out. So I set really clear boundaries. I don't take my work computer home. I don't answer work calls unless I absolutely have to. And I don't talk about I don't use my work to promote my practice or talk about it. For the most part, I keep those things really separate because I have to. As far as other aspects of my life, you know, I'm deliberately not married to an artist because a lot of my friends are artists. I work in the arts and I'm an artist, and it just was not going to work for me having a partner that's an artist. So that was he's a climber. It was a really practical, wise decision. So I guess we all have to make those decisions about our lives, about where separations and boundaries are, what's feeding something or what's detrimental and taking away from it. So I think I have a pretty good balance, but it's been some hard lessons to learn along the way.
Yeah. Leigh, I'd like to ask you a question about the relationship between artist and curator. There's so much generous trust between, particularly in this instance, the two of you. But I wonder, that relationship mustn't be natural for every artist that you work with. And I wonder, what are the key things that enable you to really foster a relationship so that you have that longevity?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I think it probably connects maybe in a way to Zoe's question around that sort of give and take and push and pull. And when Erin and I were talking yesterday, I was the times when you haven't gone, in any case, there's such a return and a reward in being able to support an artist and watch them and help them achieve these incredible projects, that often I feel like it is about being very present and also having a certain amount of strength and trust in that relationship, that whilst they're working on sometimes very abstract, very complex things that need time to percolate and make, that you're sort of with them along the way, almost like the sort of the climbing buddy beneath them, or the sort of coach or something in that way, that often you're also sort of pushing them into a place that sometimes might be uncomfortable, but only because you know the work extremely well and you know where else the work can go, and that you can see all these other, other ways that the work can be realized, obviously led entirely by the artist. But I don't know, I've always found, if I haven't sort of gone all the way and been fully involved and been physically present whilst things are being made, regular studio visits and then keeping in touch over all these years, Erin and I've always kept in touch, and she's always kept me connected with her practice, and that's that not having that level of involvement, I find, is not as rewarding, and also you don't know the work inside out. And so I think I've written about Erin's work quite a lot for Primavera, for other catalogues, and of course then there's the times where I knew for years about Dark Water and the levels that Anna and Erin had gone to make it, and that it was something that I also wanted further afield outside of WA and within an art, a curated exhibition context, to really show it in all its glory, but also within also showing related works around that to give a sense of the context. So I don't know if that's exactly answering the work, answering your question. It feels like a particular way of working, which is also about endurance and being with artists for the long game. And sometimes, you know, there's artists that it's taken me 10 years to be able to show in an exhibition or to curate a major show, but you're tracking everything and you're keeping in touch. And there's there's also a real sense of friendship and understanding, and that if you don't know the artist's position and what is important to them, you can't fully help realize those really complex things, and sort of have the guts to keep everyone else at bay while those works are manifested or are realized, you know. But also it's really fun. Obviously, you know, Erin, I'm attracted to Erin's practice because it is quite dangerous, and there is a lot of risk, and you know, making certain works like that, you know, that they take something else as sort of another level of commitment on all fronts to realize.
Yep. Thank you. I think that leads us into our last question from Cynthia Schwertzik for Erin. It's so great to see the scope of your work. I'm curious about the fascination with horror. Is it about fear?
Yeah, look, that's a really interesting question. And, you know, part of me, sometimes I think I'm still trying to understand my relationship with that. I grew up, like I said, around a dad that was a scuba diver. So, and we'd get taken out of school early and we'd go on these long trips so he could dive. And so there were times when like he'd get like a big marlin hook in his finger, and we'd have to help pull it out, or we'd see things. So I kind of grew up around seeing a lot of fishing and shell diving and accidents that happen. And I've never been squeamish. I've always had that real fascination in looking closely at things and trying to understand how they work, and wanting to be the one that's ready. If something happens, like, I'm ready, I can help with this situation. So it's partly my own sort of proclivities and urges, but also, I mean, I find as a woman that, you know, we are living with fear in a way that men aren't. And we understand our bodies in a particular way. Often they refer to horror and like the fear of the abject as being this unfamiliarity with the inside of the body. And it's like, well, that's a very male perspective. I think actually as women, you know, we bleed and we give birth, and we actually have this different relationship to the abject, and we have a different relationship to fear. And I think that there's actually a strength that comes from that. So it's partly from my own sort of feminist readings of horror and just my natural inclination. And I find that there can be this push and pull in horror, that you can make something exquisitely beautiful, but also a little terrifying, that there's elements of the sublime, there's that potential in there. There's that kind of fascination and that desire to sort of not look away, but being on the edge of having to. That for me is this trigger, I think, for also exploring some really interesting stories. So in all of the films that I've done, it hasn't just been about creating horror as an effect. It's been a way of pulling people into other ideas and stories. It's sort of it's a hook. And it's, yeah, the more I read about horror and women, the more interesting I find it. Actually, there's some great books out there at the moment. There's one called Women Make Horror by Alison Pierce, and it's all about this sort of unwritten story of women horror filmmakers. And, you know, there's Barbara Creed's classic, The Monstrous Feminine. So, yeah, I think there's a lot untapped still in that relationship between horror and women and the screen.
Definitely. Thank you so much. I think we might close questions there. This has been an incredibly informative and inspiring talk. Thank you both so much. Little round of applause from the audience. So yeah, it's been really great to also give you, Erin, the opportunity to talk to South Australian artists and to have a bit of Q&A at the end. I think that's a really nice exchange that otherwise we might not have been able to do. So thank you so much for your generosity and time, both of you. And also thank you to the audience for participating and being here today. It's been really meaningful to have you here and to have your contribution through the questions. So thank you. This session kicks off the summer series of reVision, and we have a few more sessions to go. So tonight we have Casey Ryder at 7 p.m. discussing social media strategies. Tomorrow we will hear from Professor Susan Luckman and Catherine Truman and Kath Inglis discussing the impact of mentorships on creative practice at 1 p.m, followed by Melbourne artist Mish Grigor discussing the year that has been 2020 at 7 p.m. On Thursday, Liam Benson and Julia Robinson will be in conversation at 1 o'clock with narrative adornment and metamorphosis, and Trish Hanson will discuss wellbeing within arts practice at 4 p.m. on Thursday. At 7 o'clock on Thursday night, we have our seasonal session of connections, introducing 4 national curators to the South Australian art scene. So we'll have Andy Butler from West Space, Elspeth Pitt from NGA, Jason Waterhouse from Stockroom, and Rebecca Evans from AGSA. So thank you again. I hope to see you all throughout the week, and thank you to Erin and to Leigh. It's been wonderful to talk to you today. Thank you.